Hi guys, welcome to Elixir tutorial part 2. My name is Tensor from the Tensor Programming blog. So today we're going to build a very small application, and this application is basically just going to be a small process calculator. So we're going to use a process basically to perform basic mathematic calculations. Anyway, so before we get started, I thought I'd just go over installing Elixir. It's pretty easy. Just go to elixir-lang.org/install, and there are plenty of different instructions for the different platforms. You've got Mac, Unix, which is of course Linux as well, Windows, and Docker, as well as Raspberry Pi if you need it. And all of them are pretty easy. Most of them are built into the package managers. For example, in Ubuntu, I know that the latest version of Erlang is right there, as well as Elixir. And installing Elixir also installs Erlang, and Erlang comes with a lot of different tools, a few of which we will see today. So we need to make a new project, and to do this, we just want to use the Mix tool. So the Mix tool comes with Elixir. Mix is sort of like Lineagen, which is the build tool for Clojure. So we just call Mix new, and then the name of the project that we're going to make, which is Calculator, and this will create our basic project. So let's take a look at what we've actually just created. So here we are inside of Sublime Text, and we have our calculator folder. It's got a config folder in it, a lib folder in it, and a test folder in it. Config and test are mainly for other things. So test is for test-driven development. So if you want to build assertions, you'd put them in this file, calculator_test.exs. And then config is for other things that we will not get to in this tutorial. We also have this mix.exs file, which is sort of like our package.json file. We can add dependencies into it, and then we can use mix to actually get the dependencies if we want to. In this file though, we will not be using any dependencies. Instead, we will be writing our application inside of the lib folder in this calculator.ex file. So inside of it, as you can see, there's already a sort of hello world program. We're just going to delete this. We're still going to use the module of calculator for this, however. Also, just note, Sublime Text is a really good editor for Elixir. You can also use Atom, Emacs, and Vim. And there are a few other choices as well, though these four are probably the best supported currently. The first function we want to create is called start. So we're going to say def start do. And inside of start, we want to spawn our process. So when we call start, it's going to spawn our process. And inside of spawn, we're just going to set in a anonymous function, which calls a function called loop, which we're going to create. And we're going to set in 0 into loop, and then we're just going to end it there. And that's all we're going to do for start. So what this basically is doing is this allowing us to spawn a separate process for this program to exist inside of. And of course, we're using this loop function to basically deal with messages that are being sent from other processes to this process. So as you will see when we actually get down into the Elixir REPL, the Elixir REPL itself actually acts like an Elixir process as well. So when we send messages or when we invoke functions from the Elixir REPL, we are actually manipulating it as though we were using a program process normally. Let's create our loop function. So our loop function is where most of the particular logic for this program is going to lie. So we're going to make it private. So we use defp, which is a macro which allows us to make it private. This basically means that the loop function cannot be called outside of this module. So we can't call it from IEX, for example. And if we have another module or quote-unquote namespace, we can't call it from there either. And we just do that to make it so that it's protected from side effects and stuff. So inside of it, we're going to pass in a variable called current value. And the current value in our initial value, for example, is 0. So when loop starts, the current value will be 0. And then we will say new value, which is a new variable. And we're going to use equals, which is a pattern matching tool in Elixir. And we're going to pattern match it against receive do. So we're going to pattern match it against any of the messages that this process receives. So to do that, we need to see what type of shape the messages will take. So for example, our first message will take on the shape of an atom of value, which is a representation of a function that we're going to create called value, and then a variable called client ID. We're going to set in the client ID and we're going to call the value function, and then in return we will send back a message from this process to the one that we've called it from with the client ID and then a tuple of response and current value, and then again we will call current value because we want that to be our return statement. So while we are sending this back, we will be seeing this. So we'll only see the current value when we call the value function. And that doesn't really make much sense right now, but it will make more sense when we actually get into it. So now let's actually create our operation functions. So add, we're going to pass in the value, and then we are just going to add current value to value. And we're going to do the same for subtract, multiply, and divide. So let's copy this 4 times. Let's change add into sub, and then down here we can change it into multiply, and down here we can change it into divide. And then of course we can change the operations being called. Just a note about divide, this will create a float, though this won't be a problem in this function or in this program. Keep in mind that it will create a float if you do it this way. If you want to create a integer, just call div and then put in current value, comma value, and it will return an integer instead of a float. So now after our loop finishes, well, right before our loop finishes, we need to handle any errors that we could potentially get. So we're going to say invalid request, and we're going to just return a message to the screen by using our puts function, and we're just going to say invalid request, and then we're going to use string interpolation, put inspect, and then the invalid request variable inside of it. So whatever error we get, we will return back to the REPL, and then we will return our current value. So we will get an error, and then it will return the value inside of our calculator process. Finally, before we finish this function, we need to actually loop back onto itself. So Elixir uses tail end recursion, which means that it's optimized and it's really fast. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to call loop with our new value variable. When we call loop new value, this will then loop back over it, and new value will become the current value, and then the next one will come after we call another function. So now we need to create our value function. Let's do that really quick. Now value doesn't need to be a private function. So in this value, we're just going to take in the server ID, and then we are going to send the server ID value, and then we're going to send self. Self means that we're going to send the state of this function back to the client. Then we're going to make a small receive, and in this receive block we're going to match our response value. We make sure to spell response correctly, and we're going to just return value. So when we call our value function, what will happen is we will get the current value of our process back, and you'll see exactly what we're talking about. So when we first spawn our process, if we call value, we'll get 0 back, and then if we add, say, 20 to our process, then we'll get 20 back, and then if we say multiply by 2, we'll get 40 back. You see what I'm talking about? So now let's actually create our operation function. So we can go def add, and add is going to take in the server ID and the value, and we're going to make this a single line function, so we're going to use this little macro here. So we put a comma and then we make a do with a colon at the end of it, and we're going to say send, and we're going to send back the server ID and then a tuple that has add and the value in it. So what will happen is this will actually send back, and it will echo the value that we sent into the function. Say we add 20, we'll type in the process ID that we want to add 20 to, and then we will see a tuple that will have the add atom in it, and then it will say 20 after. So let's actually copy this and create 4 of these. So now we need to make subtract, multiply, and divide. Alright, so that's it for our program for now. Let's run it and see what we got, and then we'll come back and we'll make some minor changes that will further optimize this. Alright, so we can get into the Elixir REPL by typing IEX, and this will open up a REPL. We can actually bring in our file by typing in C and then a string representation of the path to our file, so in this case lib_calculator.ex, and it will come back with a list that will say calculator, so the name of the module. And just to prove that we have calculator in here, we can call calculator.start, and this will start a process. As you can see, it returns a process ID. However, this is not how we should be doing it if we're using mix. So let's exit out of this terminal, and now let's compile the entire application. So if you're using mix to make an application in Elixir, you can compile the entire application by calling IEX-S and then mix. And this will compile the entire app. So now the app is automatically inside of our REPL. So let's play with it. So if we type in PID and then we type in calculator.start, this will bind the process ID of the calculator to PID. So now we can do calculator.value and type in PID, and this will return the value, which is 0, of the calculator process. So say we want to add, I don't know, 200 or 2000 for example to our calculator. We can do that, and as you can see, it returns the atom of add and 2000. If we check our value, it comes back as 2000. Let's multiply all of that by 30, and now we have to call value again, and we get 60,000 as our actual return. So let's simplify this a little bit. It's a bit annoying to have to call value every time. Now if we were going to leave this as an API and maybe build, say, a outer client that could just pull these numbers from this API, we may want to leave it this way, but because we're just going to be calculating everything inside of IEX, we can just simplify things by having our functions call the value function after they finish. As you can see here, I've made them into multi-line functions, and then after the send value, we will then just call value server ID, and this will return the value or the return statement of the value. So rather than having to call value after we do an operation, it will just automatically call us for us. And now we need to drop out of our REPL to make this work. So let's type in IEX-S mix again, and let's start a new process. So PID equals calculator.start. So now we have our new ID, and we can go calculator.add PID and say, let's put in 10,000, and let's multiply, say 500 to it. And as you can see, we're getting our value back instead of the atom like we were getting before. And let's call some of our other functions like divide. So let's divide all of this by 67, and as you can see, we're getting back a float now. And finally, let's call subtract. Let's subtract this from it, and now we have a negative number. Alright guys, well I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a bit simplistic. This is a bit of a classic example for Elixir, and I just thought it would be worth doing to show you guys what processes are really like in Elixir. Anyway guys, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe and like. If you have any questions or comments, then feel free to comment. And if you didn't like the video, then by all means downvote it as much as you like. I hope you guys have a good night.